Hello, folks. We're back. I'm going to tell you two stories. The first time that I encountered a Wing Chun person. Wing Chun has gotten a horrible rep today because, well, first of all, a lot of Wing Chun people suck. A lot of Kung Fu people just suck, especially in mainland China, where the communists destroyed most of traditional Kung Fu. Talk about the Cultural Revolution, right? It seems like if you want authentic, old school, old fashioned fighting kung fu, you've got to go to New York City, got to go to Cleveland, Ohio, you've got to go to New Jersey, you've got to go to, maybe some places in Europe, any place outside of China. All right, it's that bad. But I grew up in the '80s when kung fu people could fight. When if you were sparring a kung fu person, it was all you could do to hang on as a karate person. Things have certainly changed. All right. But the first time I met Kung Fu, I met someone that knew Kung Fu. I think I might have been around 11. So I had had maybe 6 months of karate underneath my belt. And we had family friends in New York City, and they were from Turkmenistan, right? And, there was this gentleman, I forget his name, but I remember strangely enough, I remember two of his kids' names. I interacted with them. But this guy was from Turkmenistan, and in his job, I think, was he worked with the U.S. government to help people immigrate. I think they were refugees or asylum seekers from Turkmenistan, which at the time was Russia. And um, he would help them get apartments and stuff. And had a really cool apartment in New York City, a big one. Um, and he had three kids that I remember. I don't remember all their names, but I remember there was one of his daughters. She was younger. Her name was Nurjan, and she was pretty cool. She was closer to my age, kind of thin. And then he had a son, the oldest kid. His name was Ihan. I don't remember the other daughter's name. Could have been Aisha. But Ihan, I don't know if you guys ever watched old Shaw Brothers movies, but if you've watched the original Iron Monkey, Ihan looked like one of the bad guys in Iron Monkey. And the same actor, I can't remember his name, but he also played the guy that Gordon Liu fought in that alleyway in the final scene of Instructors of Death. All right. So that was what this guy looked like. All right. And he had a whole bookshelf in the living room just dedicated to science fiction and fantasy and detective novels. And he had the Destroyers, the Destroyer and Matt Don Pendleton. What was that guy? Mac Bolan, right? All these really cool books. So I would just, he let me read his books, and every time we visited, I'd be like, "Let me read these books. Let me read these books. This is just so cool." And you know, somehow he was so much older. He was older than me. He was high school age, I think, or maybe just out of high school. And so he didn't really have any reason to talk to me much, but somehow we struck up a conversation. I think it was about the books. And I mentioned that, I was interested in the Destroyer um, because of the martial arts. And he said, "Do you know any?" And he met my older brothers, and they did martial arts. And he said, "Yeah, I did Wing Chun." And I'm like, "Really?" And he said, and I remember the name because it stuck out. He goes, "My teacher is Moyat. I go to Moyat Wing Chun Kung Fu." And I'm like, "Well, I'd seen it in some magazines." Remember, I'm 11. And I said, "Have you ever used it?" That's what you asked. This was the late '70s, I think. And he said, "Yeah, once." I said, "Well, what happened?" I was interested. And he said, he was in high school and some kids were, messing with him, and he was trying to ignore them. And this was New York City, '70s, late '70s. And he said, he figured the conversation was over, so he turned to walk away, and he, looked out a window or something at something, and he heard a click. And he turned around just in time to see that the guy had pulled a switchblade and was coming at him. And he said he just demonstrated. He, quickly lashed out with a low side kick, and he had his hands in the position. And I goes, then what happened? He goes, and I broke his, I hurt his knee. He said he broke his leg. I don't know if he broke his leg, but he did something to that leg. And he said that was it. I'm like, that's impressive. So I said, can we spar? And Ihan was like, you know, so well, let me see you do your stuff. So I did a kata. I did teki sandan, and he goes, okay. And he even noticed a flaw in my movement because he'd seen karate before, and he goes, I don't think you're supposed to do that. I'm like, all right. And then we sparred, and he just kind of stood there calmly in, something almost like a cat stance, but his feet were flat. And he just calmly, like, picked off my movements and he was moving slowly, even though I was moving full speed because he had a reach advantage and a size advantage. And he would just kind of place a palm here or there. What I noticed was he was very calm yet very intent. Even though he could destroy me physically, he took me very seriously. He treated it as a training exercise, and in a weird way, he respected me. And I thought that was interesting. And I think shortly before or after, my parents pulled us out of karate. There were various reasons, and then my dad and his dad had a falling out, and basically, dad is very, very, very anti-communist. And this guy, grew up in the Soviet Union, and he didn't like the Soviet Union, but he said, there's good points to communism. They disagreed politically, and they never talked again. We never went there again. And it was kind of, I thought they were real cool people because they looked very Asian. They had that, epicanthic fold, and but their language was Turkic, and they had all the cool books, and I did martial arts. Nurdan was cool. I think she kind of liked me a little bit because at some point she pretended to be into martial arts, just to strike up conversations with me, and I was clueless, of course. Um, but that was kind of cool. It left a favorable impression on me. I'm like, all right, it's different than what I did in karate, but it's interesting. And so I began reading Inside Kung Fu, Black Belt, all these magazines, and just tried to practice the concept myself. Then high school comes around, and I was working out with my friend Scott all the time after school. We'd spar, and we'd play around with techniques and stuff, and then we'd spar. And I would try to imitate what I saw Ihan do, uh, except I would be in my kokutsu dachi. And I didn't have a lot of techniques, but I'd try to imitate that attitude he had. And Scott was like, I really don't like when you do that. That's like, you get in that back stance and you're very calm and you just, you check everything with a side kick or something and you parry. And, it was more of an attitude that I got. I tried to replicate what I saw in Ihan's eyes. And so, that was 1984. I started high school. And eventually I started training with Def Mac in his system that he was, in the process of creating his curriculum of Goju Dao Te. He was even a brown belt at the time. And I met his cousin, half brother, Al Pontani. So Al Pontani was 19 at the time, and he was a bodybuilder. He was really into weightlifting, and he'd done different martial arts, um, and one of which was Wing Chun and Kung Fu. And he seemed to like that. He'd worked out with one of Jeff's instructors, Mike Bronston, the late Mike Bronston. He'd worked out, I think, a little bit with people from Shin Karate. But Al was really into weights, and he liked the forward pressure of Wing Chun. And I think he might have been into steroids too. He had like a 55-inch chest, from what Jeff told me. And looking at him, I believed him. So he said Al's gonna help me out teaching, and I said fine. That's cool. I was a yellow belt at the time, and I was really into kicks. Like I thought kicks were everything. Um, so Al didn't teach so much of a class as he warmed us up a little bit. He had really good flexibility. He was big, but he did splits and everything. And basically sparred us one at a time. And it was weird because he didn't quite spar us. Like he had one kid who was a very small kid, a yellow belt. Maybe he was 8 or 9 or something, and I was starting as a sophomore in high school. and he just kind of let this kid hit him because the kid was timid, and he just like keep hitting me, and he let the kid hit him in the body, and he was just so big. And then it came my turn to spar, and what I remember is getting ready to do a kicking combination, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 he's doing Jeet Chun Choi, and he's not hitting me with any of these blows, but it's just an incredible pressure. Like I'd never felt that many punches come that fast at me from my face to my body. It wasn't just up here. And I just remember backpedaling, and then you know he would reset and wait for me, and then I would try another kick, and he it was just disturbing to me because no one had ever fought me with that much pressure. I was like, how many punches does he do in a second? And then I think the people around me were looking around me. We worked out in a gymnastics studio, and some of the people that had I was even helping teach classes at the time that had seen me that thought I was good, or that I was a bad kid, like I was too aggressive, were just amazed that I was getting trounced like this. But I mean, like I was a kid, and Al was a full grown man, big bodybuilder, experienced martial artist compared to me, and probably on steroids. And then the final time, because I would just freeze. Final time he did that straight blast on me, he actually put so much pressure that I backed up, in my back of my head, and my upper back hit these mirrors. And at that point, like I just kind of like blindly did something, and I threw like what we called it a twist punch, which is basically a right cross, right? And I remember tapping his chest, and then he backed off and bowed to me and said, "Good." I don't know. I guess he just wanted me to stop freezing. And I was glad the match was over because I'd never been, so humiliated in a sparring session. I'd been getting better and better, and this just was a whole other level of aggression. And shortly after that, Jeff and Al had a falling out over something. He you know, pissed pissed him off somehow. I don't know how. And I didn't meet Al till years later, till after I'd gotten out of the Marine Corps and went to Mercer County Community College, and he was there, and he was older. He had lost his hair, and he was still a big guy, big bodybuilder guy, but he was like a little round in the middle. And I remember he even showed up a couple times because at the time I was also hired by Jeff Mack, and I'd gotten a brown belt in Jeff's system, went in the Marine Corps, gotten a black belt in the ATA. I'd worked out in different martial arts, even worked a little wrestling one on one with a platoon mate of mine overseas during Desert Storm. Um, when I got back, Jeff's like, "Okay, you can work for me." So he's like, "I recognize your black belt," and he actually would introduce people to me as a secondary black belt, but he never tested me for it until later. I insisted he test me for it. I'm like, if you're going to call me a second degree, I want to know that I earned it. He's like, you've earned it. I'm like, no, I want to test for it. All right. So, but I remember when I bumped into Al, and he's like, man, the gains you've made are phenomenal. And I said, Al, that one time that I sparred you, when you kicked my ass up and down that studio, you completely changed my idea of what I need to be a good martial artist. I just thought if I had really good kicks and crisp point karate techniques, that was enough. But I realized, like, you need to be strong, you need to be fast, you need to be aggressive, and you need to have a defense for this kind of stuff. And I said in the interim, I spent a lot of time looking into Jeet Kune Do and Wing Chun, and near the end of high school, I remember I studied for a summer Jeet Kune Do with Rick Tucci, which I don't even know if he's around anymore. I know the school's around, but I don't think he's involved with it. And that Jeet Kune Choi, all the Wing Chun techniques that I've ever learned, I've actually been able to pull off, and I've pulled them off in sparring and in real altercations. Um, it's weird. Like I watch these Wing Chun guys fight, and the trend in China is to find some completely out of shape non-fighter hobbyist, call them a Wing Chun master, which I've never heard of these people, half of these people, You know, put them in the cage with a professional fighter, like a guy that's had a fight record and who's trained for these things, and let them just get clobbered by guys that are much younger, much stronger, that are professional paid fighters. And it makes me wonder if the Chinese government is kind of going out of its way to humiliate traditional Chinese martial artists, um, for whatever purpose. I know China is more militarized these days. Maybe they're trying to inspire anger and martial feelings in the Chinese populace, which, I mean, that may be so. I know we do that all the time here. But those were my two earliest interactions with people that had any Wing Chun training. And to people like Chu Chidong, a lot of the haters, I'm like, why don't you just go to New York City? Why don't you just go to the tri-state region? I mean, you know, kung fu in general. If you are anywhere near New York City, all right, or Newark, or Trenton, Hamilton, uh, some of the rougher, Atlantic City. There's a lot of places in New Jersey where kung fu is taught, but they're taught in places in these cities, these urban areas, and there's a lot of Black and Latino young people studying, and they've had to use their art, and their teachers have had to use the art, and they have a combative method of using it, and it's not just kickboxing. All right, so that's just I don't know. I watch these like fight commentary breakdowns, and I'm like, where do they find these schlubs? And they don't use. Not only do they not use their art, they don't use any art. I'm just wondering, like, is that just the thing where you find somebody who barely knows something, or a self-declared master, declare them a master, and say, hey, you know, get in front of the camera, I'll make you famous, and then they just get knocked out by professional fighters. It makes no sense.